Today we have Dr. Nancy Rybicki. Nancy is an aquatic plant ecologist and affiliate professor at George Mason University. She's retired from the U.S. Geological Survey Water Mission Area in Reston, but she does continue her research as a scientist emerita. We also have Ryan McIntyre. Ryan is a research fellow with the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers and a graduate student at George Mason University studying invasion ecology, which sounds really cool. He spent the last 2 years chasing trappa around in his kayak, trying to figure out the most effective way to manage trappa invasions. And then we also have Sophia Wood, our very own, who is our urban conservation specialist at Northern Virginia Soil and Water Conservation District. She supports the Trappa bispinosa Early Detection and Rapid Response Program and assists with non-native invasive species management. So those are our presenters this morning. Please save questions and announcements for the end, and I will hand it over to Nancy to get started with our presentations. Thank you, Nancy.
You're welcome. So I am going to talk about Trappa bispinosa. It's got several names: two-horned trappa, two-horned water chestnut, and it is a newly introduced species of aquatic plant spreading around in Virginia and Maryland. My co-author is Ian Fingston. He is also with the U.S. Geological Survey. He works in Gainesville, Florida, and he is with the Wetland and Aquatic Research Center, and he is also with the Non-Indigenous Aquatic Species Database. So he does all the GIS work that I will be showing you, all the maps and all the analysis of all these colonies of water chestnut, Trappa bispinosa. In 2014, for the first time in decades, the Virginia Department of Wildlife Resources was out on the Potomac River doing a snakehead study, and they noticed a bed of some strange aquatic plant at Pohick Bay. And at first, we identified it as Trappa natans, or four-horned trappa, which is also called Eurasian water chestnut. And we identified it as that because that was the only type of water chestnut in the textbooks in North America, in the United States. But unfortunately, we later figured out that it was not that species, it was something new. So why is it important to be concerned about either the old or this new type of water chestnut or trappa? Well, in 1923, there was just a 2-acre colony of four-horned trappa found in the tidal Potomac River. And by 1940, that 2 acres had spread to 9,000 acres. It had gone from the DC area 70 kilometers downstream to Quantico, Virginia. And these dense beds of four-horned trappa were said to shade out the native bay grasses that we know to provide food and habitat for fish and waterfowl. So that history told us that this plant can have a devastating effect on the ecology of a river or a pond. This photograph on the right is from 1941, and it was on the cover of a newsletter called Science News. And it is, I'm showing it overtopping the native bay grasses because it was said to have shaded out the native bay grasses. Okay, so the impacts of having four-horned water chestnut on a body of water, well, it impedes navigation. The plants themselves obstruct navigation, and it affects recreation, and it affects the aesthetics of the water body. And these horns are spined, these horns on the seed, and they're very hard, like a Brazil nut hard. They're stiff, and if you step on one of these, they will pierce your shoe. The floating rosettes obstruct light and reduce the amount of oxygen that can get from the air into the water body. But on a positive note, in the summer, these plants will take up nutrients in the water column. So it reduces the amount of nutrients in the water column as it's taking the nutrients up. So if you actually harvest these plants to manage them, you're removing the nutrients from the water body. So Trappa, the genus Trappa, it looks like this. This is Trappa bispinosa, and this is Trappa natans, the four-horned and the two-horned. They look very similar in structure. They are both annuals. They have roots, and they have the floating leaves on the top. They are found in lakes and ponds, wetlands, any body of water, and they grow up to 10 or 15 feet deep. This genus is native to Europe, South Africa, and Asia. And it is not the plant that is canned, and it's called water chestnut. You can find it on the shelves of a grocery store. That is a whole different family of plant and entirely different. So until 2014, only the four-horned Trappa was known in the United States. And the four-horned was intentionally planted in Massachusetts and New York back in the 1800s. And it was planted as an ornamental. It's also the fruits or the seeds are edible, and it can be medicinal. And it is used medicinally in Asia and other parts of the world. Since it was introduced, it's spread throughout the Northeast, and but it was eradicated from the Potomac River decades ago. This is the range of four-horned Trappa natans. It started here in Massachusetts and spread up towards Canada. And this is Virginia and Maryland. And as I said, this red oval shows you the sites before the 1960s, like 1920 to 1960. These were the colonies in the Potomac River. And as I said, they were eradicated by the Corps of Engineers. All of the colonies were eradicated by the 1960s. There is, however, some four-horned water chestnuts still in the upper Chesapeake Bay in two rivers. So when we found it in Pohick Bay, it was misidentified as four-horned Trappa. Four-horned Trappa is, the leaves are green on the top and on the underside. It has white flowers, and as I said, the four-horned fruits. 1, 2, 3, 4. And when we were working at Pohick Bay on this colony of plants, we were looking pretty closely and collecting biomass information and morphology, and we noticed it had the two horns and that it had a pink flower. So we knew we had something different. We also noticed the underside of the leaves were reddish, and the sepals of the flower are also red. It had definitely these two horns, and there was no crown on the top of the seed, as Trappa natans has a crown. So I went to all the books I could find at the Smithsonian of the flora of China, the flora of Russia, and there are in the flora of Russia, there must be 30 different types of Trappa. So I searched and searched through these books for references of Trappa that had two seeds and a pink flower. And I narrowed it down to, I found the flora of Taiwan actually had a Trappa that had pink flowers and two horns. So I started collaborating with the scientists around the world who were studying this genus, and collaborated with scientists in the United States. And together we collected specimens, a lot of the specimens from the Northeast United States were included in the study. South Africa, China, a lot of Japan specimens, and Taiwan. And we studied the morphology of the leaf and the DNA from the leaves of 22 different populations from around the world. And the DNA indicated it was similar to the species in Taiwan, Trappa bispinosa. This Trappa bispinosa is native to Taiwan, China, Korea, and Japan. So we don't know if it came exactly from Taiwan. It could have come from any of these locations to the United States. And we done further studies and compared the Trappa natans in the Northeast with the Trappa bispinosa in Virginia. And it is definitely a distinct plant, and we published that recently. So back to Pohick Bay. In 2014, John Odenkirk, Virginia Department of Wildlife Resources, called up a bunch of volunteers, and we all went out and harvested the water chestnut in 2014. And this is a chart showing the number of pounds we harvested that year. And it was a lot, but we didn't get out there until the seeds had already dropped. It had already matured. It was September. And so the next year, 2015, we even had more, the same footprint of plants, and we had to harvest those again. But we harvested them before they set fruits. So by 2016, we had a much smaller amount to harvest. And by 2018, Department of Wildlife Resources found a bucket full of plants, and they pulled those up. And for the last few years, they've found no plants yet. So this colony in Pohick Bay was eradicated. So unfortunately, I started looking upstream into ponds and, perhaps for the source of the plants that had gotten into the Potomac, and found many ponds that had water chestnut upstream, stormwater ponds, farm ponds. So how do you manage two-horned Trappa? Well, you can use hand pulling like we did. And if you have to pay for that labor, it can be very expensive. So the other method is to use herbicides, which, because it's involves less labor cost, it's somewhat less expensive. But regardless of the management method, the ideal time for control of the plant is before it sets seeds, because that reduces the number of seeds available for recolonization the next year. And it sprouts in April. It grows all the way until December. It just dies after a hard frost, leaving behind nothing but the seed. So management is best initiated by early June, and done at several month intervals. And we have a paper by a student, Susie Podell, who studied the phenology. So how is two-horned or four-horned Trappa dispersed? Well, it hitchhikes on the plumage of waterfowl. The spines are barbed, and they will stick to clothing, fur, or feathers. The other thing is the rosette will be full of these fruits. There's the fruit, and the fruits are on the rosette, and the rosette can break off, and just the whole rosette will sail right downstream. So this is a stormwater pond upstream of Pohick Bay. It was full of water chestnut when I found it in 2014. And here's the big drainage area for that stormwater pond. And in the fall, these plants just went right down the drain there into what could be the tidal Potomac River. The other thing is the plants themselves can wrap around a boat propeller. And if they're laden with fruits, that's another way to transport the plant. And humans may intentionally trade in this plant or transport the seeds much longer distances. This is a distribution map of the two-horned trappa from 2022. This map here is, here's the Chesapeake Bay, the Potomac River. So the largest amount is in the Fairfax County area, Northern Virginia area. We also have a little bit over here in Maryland, PG, and way down here south of Farmville, Virginia, in Charlotte County. We have currently about 110 colonies in different water bodies. And there is no four-horned trappa in this range. There is only two-horned trappa here. The four-horned trappa is up above Baltimore, and it has not moved further south. So my colleague Ian Fingston and I at the USGS, we wanted to know how many other water bodies are at risk of being colonized by this two-horned water chestnut. So we delineated a dispersal area. So if it's Canada geese dispersing them, we just look to see, you know, where is the epicenter of the water chestnut, and where are the colonies currently dispersed. And we've now are using a dispersal area of 15 and 30 kilometer. It's like a buffer zone around both the northern and the southern epicenters of two-horned water chestnut. We overlaid that buffer zone over the all known water bodies. It's a database called the National Hydrography Dataset. And then we counted the number of water bodies at risk. So this is, again, just the Northern Virginia region of two-horned water chestnut. These are all in the Potomac River watershed. And then the southern colonies are in the Roanoke River watershed. So here we've overlain all the water bodies. You can see all these little blue dots are a lot of other water bodies that are vulnerable. These triangles are the colonies that currently have the water bodies that currently have water chestnut. This star is the epicenter of two-horned water chestnut in Fairfax County actually at Twin Lakes Golf Course. And this is the buffer zone. The 15-kilometer buffer zone includes almost all the colonies. There are a few colonies out here in the 30-kilometer buffer zone. These pink squares are the public boat launches. So we put them into our data set so that we can count how many places we might be worried about that the water chestnut can get wrapped around a propeller and then get transported a long distance. This is the southern range of water chestnut, two-horned water chestnut, down south of Farmville, Virginia. It's at a pond in Cullen, Virginia. There's 3 ponds altogether. This is the 15-kilometer buffer zone and the 30-kilometer buffer zone. And as I said, we're counting all the water bodies that are vulnerable in this area and all the boat ramps in this study. So the results indicate that there are thousands of other water bodies at risk of colonization by two-horned trappa. In Northern Virginia, we've got over 3,000 in that 30-kilometer radius. And 1,000 in the 15-kilometer radius around the area of Clifton as the epicenter. In that area, there's 23 public boat launches and 2 within the 15-kilometer smaller buffer zone. And in the southern range in Virginia, there's still 2,500 water bodies in the 30-kilometer buffer zone and 600 within the 15-kilometer. That's around the Cullen, Virginia. And there's fewer boat ramps down there, but there are 6 within the 30-kilometer range and none in the smaller 15-kilometer range. So we know that the oldest sites are at Twin Lakes Golf Course. That's kind of our epicenter. And when the water chestnut moved all the way from that epicenter to Charlotte County, that was 218 kilometers. So, you know, most of them are within 30 kilometers of the epicenter, but in 2022, the water chestnut colony colonization range moved to 218 kilometers from the epicenter. And as I mentioned, we have a site in Maryland that's 33 kilometers from the nearest population in Virginia. In addition, between 2014 and 2023, it's now in 5 counties: Fairfax, Prince William, Fauquier, Loudoun, and Charlotte, and 1 county in Maryland, PG County. 70% of the colonies that we are aware of are in Fairfax County, and 20% are in Prince William County. Good news is in 2023, several aquatic plant programs were funded by the state of Virginia. One of them is the Northern Virginia Soil and Water Conservation District has funding for Fairfax County, and the Virginia Department of Ag and Consumer Services has funding for eradicating two-horned trappa statewide. We do not know how many water bodies exactly have water chestnut, but it's going to be at least a 2 to 5 year effort to either to try to stop or slow it down. So we've got we got to stay on this for a while. And also the Virginia Department of Wildlife Resources, they continue to manage the large lakes such as Lake Brittle and Lake Burke Lake. So we have management already in about 60% or more of the sites, which is good news. But we need volunteers to go looking around and reporting it if they see it. So if you see it, it's great if you could report it to the USGS Non-Indigenous Aquatic Species Database, which is this link here. And you look for different things depending on the season. In the winter, you can look for the seeds up on the shoreline. They're empty hulls of the seeds, and you can see them on the shore. In April, May, you can see a sprout. Here's the seed at the base of it. And then between June and December, you'll see the plant at the surface. Again, here are the seeds for winter, just sprouting here in April. Here's a young seedling in May, the seed here at the base, and tiny little rosettes in May. And then by the end of May, the rosettes are getting wider and starting to form flowers and starting to make their little seeds. And this is a colony at the surface. So early detection really helps reduce removal cost and ecological impact. So we really need volunteers and government-led efforts to survey and manage these populations. Unfortunately, this downstream migration and waterfowl dispersal may be outpacing the current efforts. So if you see it, please report it to the USGS Non-Indigenous Aquatic Species Database. If you are in the state of Virginia, there are forms you can fill out to get permission and get on the list for VDACs to treat the pond in a private or public location. And recently, as of July 4th, this species is now on the noxious weed list for Virginia. And it's a tier 2 species, which means a noxious weed that is present in the Commonwealth of Virginia and for which successful eradication or suppression is feasible. So we've made the list with our Trappa. Two-horned Trappa has made the list. And I'd like to thank so many managers and volunteers that have provided information about where the colonies are, that all that information goes into the USGS database where we can analyze it, and all the people that are just doing research and helping keep this database current. There's a new reference now, Plant Invaders of the Mid-Atlantic Natural Areas. It's the first flora book that includes both Trappa natans and Trappa bispinosa, so take a look at that. I have references for all of these things I've said, and more references. And if you have any questions, please let me know.
Thanks, Nancy.
Okay.
We are gonna, I think we'll hand it over to Ryan. I know there are a couple of questions in the chat, but perhaps they will be answered by the other presenters. So we'll just keep going, and then we can do questions at the end if that's okay.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you so much for coming out. Like we said before, I'm Ryan. I'm a research fellow with the Army Corps of Engineers. And for the past 2 years, I've been chasing Trappa around in my kayak, trying to figure out the best way to manage it. So, as Nancy explained, currently Trappa is not being managed by one body. Trappa is managed by a bunch of groups. So there's federal agencies, state governments, volunteer groups, universities, and private contractors that are all trying to tackle this problem, and they're doing it in their own ways, using their own methods. So it's my job to race around between all of these different locations and figure out what's working best, where Trappa's popping up, and how effective these different management styles are. So in order to better understand how all these different management methods used by all these different groups, Nancy and I worked together to develop a universal protocol where I show up at a pond, I can use the exact same methodology every single time to figure out how good Trappa is growing and how it's reacting to different treatment methods. That involves counting the number of rosettes that are present within a 1 meter plot, as well as the numbers of fruits and the amount of fruiting bodies and flowers that are present, so we can understand how effectively it's reproducing and how effectively it's growing. As a fun addition, this is a brand new thing that I'm just able to share. I was able to get recently funding access for a camera drone, and I'm now an FAA certified drone pilot. This is a brand new thing, but I just wanted to share it because it's really exciting for me, which allows me to get photographs like this that help me really understand the extent of Trappa infestations. Here, this huge green bank is a dense Trappa infestation, but it also helps me get photos like this, which is post-treatment, where just a couple are starting to pop back, and photos like this, look, there's me, where we're looking at places that have been treated and Trappa starting to reemerge. But a quick talk about where I'm going. I have a pretty tight set of factors that demonstrate where I am working. So it needs to be a location that has had really dense Trappa and is being actively treated. And in the summer of 2023, that somehow was only 5 locations. Due to improvements in funding, I have a lot more locations this summer, but I have a complete data set for last summer, so that's what we're going to talk about today. My locations include Beltsville, Maryland. There's a beaver dam pond there in the middle of a federal facility with a nasty infestation. But closer to home, there's also one behind Expectations Church in Fairfax. There's the center of our infestation, which is Twin Lakes Golf Course in Clifton. There's also Burke Lake, which I'm sure a lot of you guys know, as well as Wapples Mill Park in Oakton, Virginia. So those are some sites that I've been to month after month to see how trappa is growing back after treatments. Here's a quick visual look at how these are laid out in the DC area. And I'd like to note that this map was made with the help of Ian Fingston at USGS. Now, in the summer of 2023, we had two core management styles. There was manual and chemical. Manual, as Nancy explained earlier, involves the physical removal of trappa biomass. This is usually done by hand, but can be done with a dredge and other tools. And chemical, of course, involves the application of herbicides. So, manual trapping of trappa has a long history. Of course, there was the harvesting of the original trappa invader, Trappa natans, way back in the 40s. But also within the last decade, there's been harvesting of Trappa bispinosa, and we've had several successful eradications using that method. However, its success depends entirely on the timing of it and its completion. If you are extracting your Trappa after seed set, then there's not a lot, it's not going to help terribly much because the seeds are set and the deed is done. Also, it very much depends on completion. You need to extract both the entire plant and the entire infestation for it to work. And that sounds super simple, but in practice can be a lot harder than you think, which takes us to one of our sites, BCMD, or what we call Beaver Dam Creek. Here's a quick look at some photos. We did an early season extraction in June of last year. You can see right here, this first photo is before extraction. And then after 3 days comprising of 195 man hours, which is approximately 10 to 15,000 in labor, we were able to remove part of it. So 1 month later, you can see it's starting to come back. And by 3 months, it looks like we didn't do anything. So it's very important when you're doing physical extraction to remove the whole plant and the entire infestation, because partial extractions can just promote clonal growth, which is where a single plant with its thread that leads up to the water can break apart and have multiple rosettes. And in fact, when I was pulling up rosettes to take specimens from controlled areas, I found that areas that had been extracted and later regrew had more rosettes per plant than control areas that had never been treated. I want to know more about that. So currently I've brought home a bunch of specimens and have them in buckets in my backyard. And I have a set of specimens that are allowed to grow normally and a set of specimens that I've cut in half. And within a week, specimens that had been cut in half were already growing new rosettes. So it's very important that the entire plant is removed during a manual removal. And that's not always easy because they can have strong root systems that are very hard to pull all the way out, especially if the stem breaks during removal. And then good luck finding the roots in murky water. So it's a very difficult thing to achieve. It can be done, but it's not simple. Which brings us to our next management style, which is herbicides. Now, herbicides have historically been given a really bad name by misuse and application of what have been coined forever chemicals. Chemicals that don't break down and persist in the environment and can affect things for generations to come. I want to make it very clear, and we're going to be discussing, that the herbicides currently in use are not those chemicals. We have currently a brand new class of herbicides that are specifically designed to break down in the environment so that the active molecule itself doesn't persist much longer than a few weeks at most. I'm going to start about our first herbicide, which is known as flumioxazin, or the commercial name Clipper. This is a foliar herbicide. It's applied to the top of the leaves and disrupts the way the plant makes chlorophyll. Depending on the pH of the water, it can have the half-life of a day to 5 days. So it doesn't stick around in the environment and it doesn't bioaccumulate, which means it sticks around in the bodies of animals. So it has none of the concerns of earlier herbicides, and we've seen mixed effects on its effectiveness on Trappa. For example, here's a photograph from Twin Lakes from last year, where there's a pretty dense patch of Trappa. It was treated 3 days after that photo was taken, and by 1 month later, there was already some bounce back, okay? So flumioxazin can be effective, but it needs repeat applications to ensure that Trappa isn't able to set seeds before the growing season is over. Another one of our herbicides that we're observing right now is an herbicide called Floridone, or a commercial name Sonar, which is a pre-emergent herbicide, which functions a little bit differently. What it does is it breaks down the carbohydrates in seeds and prevents plants from germinating to begin with. Floridone has a half-life of a little less than a month, and like flumioxazin, doesn't bioaccumulate. So right now, we're still in our first year of Floridone testing, but the results have been really promising, with several of our ponds showing no Trappa emerging. All right. Now, all of these methods are very effective when applied properly. However, chemical treatments are looking to be the most economically feasible method, and we're currently exploring further research on different herbicides to figure out which one is the best tool for our job. All right, and happy to take questions.
All right, so my name is Sophia Wood. I work with the Northern Virginia Soil and Water Conservation District. I'm just going to talk a little bit about our program. Nancy did mention it in her report. But so our district, the Northern Virginia Soil and Water Conservation District, applied for grant money through the Environmental Improvement Program in Fairfax County a few years ago. So our primary goal with that is try to suppress the spread of Trappa bispinosa. So this project is referred to as the Multi-Agency Water Chestnut Early Detection Rapid Response Control Program. So we receive funding on an annual basis pending application approval. Some of our partners with this include Fairfax County Park Authority and the Department of Public Works and Environmental Services, so DPWES. And then we partner with them to manage water bodies for Trappa as one element of the various invasive plant control initiatives. This program specifically also supports ongoing regional efforts through the National Capital PRISM and its Trappa Interstate Management Task Force subgroup, which 3 organizations participate. So that would be Fairfax County Park Authority, DPWES, and then my employer, which is Northern Virginia Soil and Water Conservation District. So we all join several local, state, and federal agencies in the management of this threat. And then we also try to attempt to limit its spread throughout the region and the country. So that's just a little bit of the background of our grant program. Here's a quick map showing Trappa in Fairfax County. Nancy and Ryan have shown a few different maps already, but this kind of shows the infestation just specifically within Fairfax County. So our current treatment plan, like Ryan mentioned, our herbicide of choice is flumioxazin as a foliar application. So we would just be spraying on the floating rosettes. We do contract out that labor, which is funded by the grant money. And like Ryan stated, flumioxazin must be sprayed multiple times in the season in order for effective management. So our contractor sprays once a month between May and October. Some of the Trappa doesn't emerge until about June, so sometimes we start in June or July. But unfortunately, our grant program only funds public parks, HOAs, and places of worship at this time. So we're only able to touch anything in Fairfax County that's publicly owned. But luckily, the Virginia Department of Agriculture and Consumer Services, like Nancy mentioned, is able to take the private ponds over and treat those. So we are currently just treating 20 ponds within Fairfax County. And how did we generate our treatment plan? We've worked a lot with the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, specifically a research biologist named Lindy Dodd and her team in Texas. She's helped us out a lot by choosing the correct application, what has the least off-target injury to native plants. There's a lot of science behind choosing the herbicide, not just spraying a bunch of chemicals and dumping a bunch of chemicals in the water. We've had a lot of help from Ryan as well and Nancy from USGS to formulate our plan. So these are a few pictures that I have just before and after treatment of last year. So this is at Waples Mill Meadow Park, before in May, and then after one treatment in June, as well as Twin Lakes Golf Course at Pond 2, before and after in June or July of last year. We have historically done a few volunteer manual harvesting events. My district provides protective equipment such as waders, gloves, and life jackets. As of September of 2023, we've removed over 1,000 cubic feet of trappa. That's pretty loose measurement. We weren't really able to correctly measure the amount of pounds, but so we measure it in cubic feet. So this picture right here shows some snow fencing, some orange snow fencing. We call those like floating composters. So basically it's 2x4s connected with snow fencing and then some zip ties. And then we built about 4 composters within the pond prior to the pull. Maryland DNR recommended this technique. It shows to help harvest trappa at least 3 to 4 times more rapidly. It compares to having to drag buckets of trappa in and out of the water onto the land. And a lot of the ponds that we're dealing with are super mucky, pretty tough to get in and out without getting stuck in the mud. So it's nice to not have to walk in and out and just be able to dump the trappa into the composters. So a critical mass of vegetation is needed for the trappa to properly decompose, but the property that we chose last year to harvest at had almost 100% coverage. It was Expectation Church that Ryan mentioned. So we had plenty of mass to decompose on itself. So these are some before and after pictures of Expectation Church using manual harvesting. There's a significant infestation in that pond. Takes a lot of man hours. In September of 2023, we've had about 40 volunteers over the course of 4 days that pulled, like I said, an estimated 1,000 cubic feet of trappa. And what we've learned from our partners at USGS and the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, that trappa should be pulled 1 weed at a time in order to avoid the stem from breaking off and then the root crown being left behind. From what I have learned is that there's potential recovery for Trappa that has been cut above the root crown, according to some publications from the research biologist that I mentioned, Lindy Dodd. And then Ryan also mentioned it. But here's an aerial view of before and after our 4-day event. So you can see on the right side our composters in the ponds. After 4 days, we were only able to pull a very, very small amount in the pond due to the timing. September, all the fruits were mature, the plants, the root systems were super difficult to pull out. You could reach down and basically get pulled by the Trappa. If you're in a boat, it'll pull you with it. It's very dense infestation in this pond, but a lot of man hours. So that's why we mostly chose herbicide treatment, because it does cost a lot for manual harvesting, takes a lot of man hours. At this time, we don't have any manual harvesting events scheduled for this year, but any future dates needed for volunteers, if any of you are interested, that will be announced on our watershed calendar. If any of you are subscribed to that, I can have Trish or myself put in a link to that subscription, but that will announce any volunteer opportunities that we'll have upcoming. And I just want to thank my supervisor, Scott. He is the primary point of contact for Trappa, as well as myself through the Northern Virginia Soil and Water Conservation District. There are references in this presentation from Nancy Ribicki, Lindy, Ryan, Ian Finkston, our executive director, Willie. So let me know if you guys have any questions.
Thank you, Sophia. We did have some good questions in the chat, and my apologies if any of our presenters addressed them as I was trying to do other things, but let me go back. And we had a question from Bill about the original eradication from the Potomac and how the Army Corps exactly achieved that during Nancy's talk.
So there are publications in the Richmond Times, and the Fish and Wildlife Service has a publication about how it was eradicated back in those days. Both of those refer to harvesting, mechanical harvesters, which were, I think, mostly invented for pushing the water chestnut out of the water in the Potomac. So they clip like hedge clippers at the bow of the boat, and then the clipped material goes onto a conveyor belt, and then the plants are offloaded. Or they can use apparently they can use the harvesting equipment or manual labor to push the plants up into the above the low water mark, so they could get them to dry out. So they're 99.9% water, the plants are, and if you can get them out of the water onto the shoreline, the plant will die. I think Maryland Department of Natural Resources has also some records that maybe 2,4-D might have been used at that time. I haven't got hold of those records. So for the most part, it's my understanding that it was physically removed using harvesters back, and that's how they eradicated it from the Potomac River, and it was done by the Corps of Engineers.
Could I ask a follow-up question to that?
Yeah.
Is there any reason why, if that successful technique was, well, if that technique was successful, that it hasn't been replicated, in the sense that if that mechanical harvester worked and pushing it out worked and you got rid of 9,000 acres and all the seed viability in the Potomac, that's not a being repeated. Why are we reinventing the wheel if the wheel worked?
Well, it's not in the Potomac. It is in small private ponds that you couldn't use a harvester. Most of the ponds are 1 acre or less. So essentially, the Corps of Engineers had several harvesters on the tidal Potomac at that time, and the Corps of Engineers was the responsible party because it was obstructing navigation. So in this case, the Corps of Engineers is not the responsible party on ponds. So, and the harvesters are too large for that kind of thing. There are huge mechanical devices, but they're very expensive. And to date, the money has been spent by VDAX on, I guess, the quickest way to do it. I can't really speak for, how VDAX has made their management decisions, but I suspect harvesters just won't work in ponds.
Okay, maybe it's a good grad student program to try to design one that works on a John boat size scale.
There are John boats. There is one available at the Fairfax County Park Authority that is a John boat size one. And that one should be looked into. Part of the problem with that is getting a John boat in and out of these ponds. It's not easy to launch a boat into the majority of these ponds. But that's a good idea, and I think you're right. It should be looked into.
Kevin asked a good question about why the pods were transported in the first place. Are they edible? What is the motivation for intentionally transporting them?
I don't know, but there are some jurisdictions. Another question was, is there a law against transporting? Right. So Canada has a law, and they actually have, but their laws are by province, so, and that would be the case probably anywhere you have laws against the transport of an invasive species. It takes a lot of time to get that in place, and then usually the law has to be in effect where it's coming, where, every jurisdiction that it crosses. So it's not, that is going to be a great mechanism when we get that in place. But right now it's not in place. And people will trade ornamental plants because they're pretty. They'll trade them because they have medicinal value, and because in traditional cultures in India and Asia, they may have used them in that country, and they may want to have it here for their own personal use, and they might have brought it for that reason and planted it somewhere nearby, and then it got out of hand. But I have no evidence of really how it got here. I know that the first voucher specimen is from 1995, and it's a pressed specimen of two-horned trappa. It's housed at the Virginia Tech Herbarium, and it was collected by an extension agent in a pond, one pond in Westmoreland and one pond in Stafford County. So we know that it was around in 1995, and the specimen says right on it that it was the pond owner was told to pull it up, eradicate it, get rid of it because it was invasive. And I don't, we don't have much monitoring down in Westmoreland or Stafford, but we haven't had any reports of two-horn trappa in that area. We need more monitoring.
I think this was a question for Sophia. Bev asked, their HOA stormwater management pond is a private facility. Would that be eligible for funding if migration from nearby Burke Lake occurred, for example?
So we do work with stormwater, and I guess we communicate to them which ponds we're treating, and sometimes they do take over treatment for us if it's a stormwater management pond. What do you think, Nancy or Ryan? Should we refer them to VDAX or stormwater?
The first thing is to get it on the list. The master list is by reporting it to the USGS. Then we can give that master list to either Fairfax County or to Sophia's group, or we can give it to VDAX, or you can directly apply by going to VDAX and getting the permission form. All you have to do is get the permission form and then you're on the list. So there's, but first you have to let us know and then we can help you better.
And it sounds like that was maybe a hypothetical. It hasn't, if it migrated, I guess they're close to
Okay.
Burke Lake, and if it
Yeah.
comes over by a goose or whatever.
Well, it sounds so familiar. I was thinking, totally familiar story to me. So, I thought maybe it was real. Yes, please let us know, email me or, Sophia, and we'll make sure you get into the database and try to direct you to the right place, or just directly a person would go to VDAX. And VDAX would let them know if it was covered by some other, by Fairfax County.
Rick asked, how soon after rosettes appear will seeds form and set? Sorry, is treating with herbicides once a month sufficient to prevent development of a seed bank?
So rosettes usually form at earliest late May, and they'll grow. When they first appear, they'll maybe be a little less than 10 centimeters, and throughout several months, they'll grow to sometimes over a foot wide. And I would expect seeds, the first sign of mature seeds is probably going to be mid-July, is what I would estimate. And I would say that herbicides, and actually I have observed that herbicide application is enough, because what that does, herbicide application, as we've observed, kills all of the plants that are on the top of the water. Occasionally, they're able to send up another shoot to come to the top of the water, but that rosette needs time to mature and develop seeds. So you sort of reset the clock. And it's important to understand for the life cycle of trappa is that it is an annual. So what first frost is going to kill everything. So what you do is that herbicide is going to set back the clock until the first frost can take everything out before seeds can develop.
There are a couple questions asking about herbicide treatment versus pulling, what you mentioned about breaking the trappa actually making the situation worse, and how you figure out which method to use and in what combination. So it sounds like it's a confusing situation.
Yeah, it often needs to be decided on a case-by-case basis. It depends on what funding is present, because, a team of volunteers is free, even though it's notionally so many thousands of dollars. And it's easier to get, sometimes it's often easier to get together a huge team of volunteers than it is to wait several years for herbicide funding through the government. A lot of the programs that are available to us today, we've been working to get together for years now, and we're really excited that they're available for people. But for a long time, manual harvesting was the only thing we had.
Helene
the
asked, oh, sorry, Nancy, go ahead.
I think one of the questions was, will a fragment start a new plant? No, a fragment of water chestnut is not robust like some plants are that readily floats downstream and starts a new plant. So, some plants are more readily started by fragments than others. This one is not like that. And like Ryan said, you're restarting the clock. If you were to just cut the tops off of the rosette and push that material take it and put it in a composter, you're restarting the clock for the flowers and fruits to form again. You have to do it over and over. Make sure you don't let those rosettes form flowers and fruits.
Yeah, it's best to remove the entire plant, but it's not always possible.
Helene asked about impacts to other health other plants. It's a non-specific herbicide, is that correct? And so what have you observed about recovery of other plant life?
Something I'll note about a lot of our natives is that they have very deep roots. So even if you kick back the photosynthetic part, they're usually able to rely on their rootstock to grow back next year. That also raises a really interesting idea of what we call habitat restoration and restoration ecology, which means even after we've done all the work of removing things, we take the time to take our time to reset the environment and to reintroduce natives.
So there's very few studies on flumioxazin and its effect on non-target species, but there are a few. They're not even yet published. So all of that is in process. I will say that just in case it was misunderstood, the entire plant, water chestnut plant, disintegrates in the winter, and all that's left behind is the seed. It's not like a root stock that starts. It's the seed that starts the next generation. Sometimes this plant will regenerate if the fruit drops in September, and it doesn't require a winter to emerge. So if it gets warm again in the beginning of December, that seed that was dropped in September may sprout in December. That's why, it'll take it a while to form new seeds, but that's why you have to keep going back, because they don't all sprout at the same time. The majority of them sprout in May, June, but some of them are sprouting up sporadically all throughout the year.
Is there any concern about all of that biomass decomposing if you use the herbicide treatments and then you leave it in place, right? And then all of that is breaking down in the water?
That is such a good question. So in areas where there is 100% cover, we usually will treat like a third of it at a time for exactly that reason. For those who might not know, breaking down biomass can pull dissolved oxygen out of water, and that can really affect fish. So we've observed we do research here in the DC area, as well as research in upstate New York on Trapanatans. And our ponds in Trapanatans, where there's really dense cover, we'll do one section of the pond at a time to make sure there's not too much rotting biomass to take out dissolved oxygen. So excellent question.
There was let's see, someone asked Sarah if birds would eat trappa. Has there been evidence of geese eating the rosettes or any use by native?
So
species?
From personal observation, not really, but I've noticed a little bit of occasional like turtle bite marks out of rosettes. I've never noticed anything with birds, but what I have noticed is occasionally at certain sites, there'll be piles of empty seed husks, which I believe are muskrats preying on the carbohydrate packets that are present in the seeds, which is actually the same part that's edible for human consumption.
I did want to note that I dropped our newsletter link to sign up for the watershed calendar that Sophia mentioned. If they do have any fun kayak trips or manual removal, if we have any manual removal events, I know we've had a lot of discussion about how effective they are, but it sounds like a great time regardless. So if we do have any any volunteer events upcoming, that's how you would find out about those.
That's awesome. There are definitely locations where manual removal is still a good option, but it's good that we have herbicides in our toolkit now and we have funding for that.
Are there any other questions that I missed? If anybody would like to,
Hey, Trish, it looks like Rhonda Bitterly had a question. In the places where it originated, for example, Taiwan, is Trappa bispinosa considered a problem? If so, how is it controlled there?
In Taiwan, the location where we got the specimens, it was actually being protected. And in some parts of the Europe where it's being protected. In China, I observed it, there's so much of it in the impoundments that I observed that, you know, there was no need for it to be protected. So, but there are a few places around the world where it's becoming their threatened species, and I'm not sure why.
Yeah.
But it has beetles will eat it, and there is research for biological control in the United States using beetles to control Trappa natans, the four-horned. But those studies are still ongoing.
Rhonda, your question actually hits at a really cool facet of invasion ecology, which is that plants and animals that are invasive in one region aren't necessarily stronger or better than our native animals. They're just in a new context and therefore play by a different set of rules. So there's nothing in the United States that's going to predate on Trappa. There's nothing that's going to eat it. So it's able to just grow and grow and grow without anything controlling it. Whereas in its native range, there's probably herbivores that eat on it and keep it naturally in check. So the people who live there never really have to worry about it. So it's not that it's better, it's just in a different context.
Thanks, Ryan. Bill, did you want to unmute and ask a question?
Yeah, please. I actually have one or two questions. I guess the seed viability is not an issue here because it's an annual and it's intended to sprout every year, so it's not an issue where the seeds will be around for years and years, so you can almost never get ahead of it.
That's something we're still learning about. We've observed that there's a very high germination of Trappa bispinosa, meaning that most of the seeds set the previous year will come up the next year. But we're still learning about exactly how long they can persist in the ecosystem.
And thank you. I guess one question with the volunteer, especially with the aerial, the drone footage of the church pond, given what you showed in terms of recovery in a month in a place where it wasn't fully eradicated, is it a worry that asking volunteers to come out and spend days pulling half a pond only to know that they're going to come back in a month and see that they've basically got a pond that looks the same as if they'd never been in it, causes either volunteer burnout or a decision that, why are you wasting my time? You're misleading me into thinking I'm helping when I'm not.
Absolutely. People should not be misled. And I think that really was more of a outreach and education. But I think it would be better to announce right on the invitation that this is outreach and education. Unless we get 600 hours of volunteers, this will not work. And if you only get 60 hours of volunteers, it's simply outreach and education. If you get 600 hours, you might actually eradicate it from that location.
I think that's an important message in all volunteer activities, because I know I've been on a pond pulling water chestnut, and it's frustrating. And I'm wondering, Nancy, I know I reported the Waples Mill Pond several years ago. I don't know if it was known before me or not, but it was gratifying in a sense to see that it's in there being dealt with now. But I stumbled on that during a water sampling activity that I was doing.
Well, thank you for reporting it. And it was known about. Fairfax County Park Authority put it on iNaturalist, I think.
Well, that's where I put it, and that was going to be the next thing I asked. Is you talk about it? It took me a while to find you, in
Right.
the sense of tracking down. I found it out there in the pond. Where should I let people know? It took a few emails back and forth to the Master Naturalist community back then. Is it enough to simply? Are you watching iNaturalist routinely to see that if it shows up there as an observation, you've got it, as opposed to people having to chase down, in a sense, like I did, you in order to feel confident that it had been found?
If it's easier for a person to put it on iNaturalist first, and then if they have time, chase us down, then we want them to put it on iNaturalist first. And we don't have any, it may take us a year to get to iNaturalist. Sometimes we have people that on the team that will look at iNaturalist periodically. So it takes longer for it to get on the master list, but it's still a viable way of getting the information to the master list.
I'm not sure. I'm not an expert in iNaturalist, but two thoughts on that. One, I think you can search on a single species, so it would be pretty easy for anyone to simply once a week almost just go and look for any new postings on what you're looking for. So that would take only minutes. The other, I think, is you could set up a project that basically says if anywhere in Virginia this species is identified, that even without signing up to the project, it picks up that,
Right.
And you would just have to watch that project for the whole state, and it would automatically, it would harvest them from iNaturalist for you.
Right. Well, we just don't have anybody to do that. We don't, and we do it periodically. Somebody will do it, and they will. It's just currently there is no paid person to keep track of the colonies, so it just takes a little longer.
Thank you.
I'm not paid. I don't know. So it's just nobody's job, but it does get done eventually.
Yeah, I'm just wondering if you contacted the iNaturalist folks like Kerry Seltzer or somebody and just said, could someone set up the project that's called Water Chestnut Virginia, and just establish it such that any observation in the state of Virginia automatically goes there? Then there would be no other work than to have someone look there. That it would cost no paid work. It would just be anyone, any day could just click Water Chestnut Virginia, and the entire list would be there, and it's all done automatically by the system.
That's a great idea. And
I wonder if that's something Conservation District could.
That'd be great.
Staff could.
All right.
I just volunteered you, Sophia. Just that I wonder.
No worries,
Sophia
we'll
wanted
work on it.
if Sophia wanted to understand better what I'm talking about, if she wanted to get in touch with Bill Hafker, that's fine. You can find me on the Master Naturalist list or however it makes sense.
What was your last name, Bill?
Hafker,
If you-
Hafker.
Thank you for all the insight and information. Sorry, Sophia.
No,
I'm in
no, it's
trouble.
definitely something that we'll look into. So
Thank you.
Any other questions before we wrap up for this Saturday morning? I do want to thank our presenters again, Nancy, Dr. Rybicki, and Ryan, and Sophia. And thank you all very much for coming. Our next Green Breakfast will be in September. What did we decide, Heather? The 14th?
Yes,
And-
September 14th. Yes.
September the 14th. So we hope to see you there. And I hope everyone has a great rest of their Saturday. Thank you all very much for coming. And thank you to
Thank
our
you.
presenters.